Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Jennifer Scherze, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar where we're going to talk about clinical nursing calculations and how to give your students the tools and the knowledge that they need to medicate safely. I have the distinct pleasure today of introducing our author and presenter, Susan Sienkiewicz, and she is a Jones and Bartlett Learning author as well as department chair at the Community College of Rhode Island, where she's been teaching the dosage calculation course since its inception in 1994. She also has clinical experience across pediatrics, obstetrics, and medical surgical nursing. Her co-author is Sandra Megredician. She too has experience in med-surg nursing, critical care, and nursing leadership. And she's also taught the dosage calculations course at CCRI since 1999. A little fun fact about both Sue and Sandra combined, they bring 53 years of teaching experience and over 80 years of nursing to this textbook. So, Susan, why don't you take it away?
Sure. Well, thanks, Jennifer. All right. So I'm going to start by talking about what's unique about the textbook, Clinical Nursing Calculations. And first and foremost, it provides a systematic approach, and the systematic approach is what we call the CASE approach. And CASE is an acronym for Convert, Approximate, Solve, and Evaluate. And we did this to really promote fluency in math, and I think we're all striving. We all want our students to strive for math fluency. The approximation and evaluation steps are the two steps that really promote critical thinking, and we find that that's particularly useful for math-challenged students. Critical thinking, as you probably are well aware, has seriously been weakened in our students with their reliance on technology for answers to everything. And what we found is that the approximation step will help eliminate persistent errors, which I'll show you on a subsequent slide, by revealing to students answers that don't make sense when a problem is incorrectly set up. The textbook, bullet point number 3 there, shows it presents all 3 methods of dosage calculations side by side. What do I mean by the 3 methods? Ratio, proportion, formula method, and dimensional analysis, as opposed to having them be in separate chapters or separate sections of the chapter or one method following the other. And when the students can see it side by side, it facilitates them learning multiple methods. And when people can learn multiple ways to do things, they can learn it better. And that really facilitates concept and content mastery, we think. Each of the chapters open with a case consideration, and that's like a little story or a little case study that immediately engages the learner. And that case consideration or problem that's presented is resolved in the case closure, which is included at the end of each chapter. Another thing about this textbook is that we include NCLEX style questions, both multiple choice and multiple select, at the end of each chapter, and we're going to add more to the online content. So if you look at this persistent error, this is probably, you can come up with some similar errors that happen with your students as well. But here we have an order for 12.5, and the supply is 25 milligrams, and the most common wrong answer, excuse me, is 2 tablets. And it's because they did the math incorrectly. So what we show them on the right with Convert, Approximate, Solve, and Evaluate is when you do your approximate step, you have to say to yourself, do I need more than the supply or less? Since my supply is more than the order, I need less than the supply, therefore my answer needs to be less than 1 tablet. So if they do that before they actually even set the problem up to solve it, if they get 2 tablets, they will say, wait a minute, that can't be right, because it's not consistent with my approximate step. And then the evaluate step is a second, it's a double check. It's a double check step. And it's 2 parts. First, do they say, is my answer consistent with approximate? And also, when I plug in my answer that I received for X, does the math work? And we can show you that in the next example. So let's look at another example. All right, here we have cefaclor, 0.433 grams. So we have a conversion. We look at, for the approximate step, after we convert, we say, gee, do I need more than the supply or less? I need more, therefore my answer needs to be more than 5 milliliters, but less than 10 milliliters. That's where we want our students to get to, that type of critical thinking. So if you look at the next slide, you can see that the solve and the evaluate steps are there. And so in the and throughout the textbook, all of the solve and evaluate steps are shown in these two boxes. And we added that fourth step, that evaluation step, so that they can double check their answers. So literally what they do is they replace X with the answer that's obtained in the solve step. And then they redo the math in the evaluation step. So you can see they replace X 5.773. So when they get to the evaluate step, if you click again, Jen, you can see the next, there you go. So you can see now they're saying, does 375 times 5.773 equal 5 times 433? If they were to use the ratio proportion method, that would be one way to do their evaluation or to check their math. We really, again, feel that the approximation and evaluation steps are very important. We feel like if you can't approximate, you can't evaluate. If you can't evaluate, you're not safe to medicate. And a great feature of the text is that we put all the methods together so that the students can really, it facilitates comparison of all three methods, and hopefully students will try more than one method. So let's talk about the pedagogical features of the text. Each chapter begins with a chapter outline, followed by student learning outcomes, and key terms are provided at the beginning of each chapter. And then when the first time the term is presented, it's presented in bold so that the student knows that's a key term. As I mentioned before, each chapter opens with a case consideration and closes with a case closure, and we'll see an example of each of those on a subsequent slide. After a concept or calculation procedure is presented, 1 to 3 examples are provided so that the students can learn to apply that information. Learning activities are stop points for students to test their knowledge of the previous information that was taught. Warnings are inserted in each chapter to alert students to important information pertaining to safe clinical practice. Rounding rules are included as a distinct feature. Students have a lot of difficulty, we found, determining when to round to whole numbers versus tenths versus hundredths. So rounding rules are inserted where appropriate to remind the learner that rounding is typically based on equipment. Clinical clues are inserted to provide examples of how this information pertains to clinical practice. A chapter summary is included at the end of each chapter. It's organized by learning outcomes. And 50 homework questions and 6 NCLEX style review questions are included at the end of each chapter. And we're going to put more homework and NCLEX style questions to the online content. Let's look at this slide here. This is an example of a case consideration and case closure. It comes from Chapter 3, the equipment chapter. And so this presents a dilemma in the case consideration. On clinical day 1, the student needs to draw up 2.2 milliliters, and on clinical day 1, the student uses a 3 ml syringe and draws 2 calibrations past the 2. Clinical day 2, selects a 5 milliliter syringe and also draws it up 2 calibrations past the 2. So ends up drawing up too much on clinical day 2. And so that a lot of these little case considerations are examples of things that have happened with students. So you might relate to some of them as well. So these, in many cases, as I mentioned, no pun intended, these are dilemmas or incidents that actually occurred. The next slide shows you some learning activities. So those are natural stop points for students to apply information they just learned. The top one is the 5th learning activity in Chapter 2, which is Systems of Measurement. The learning activity on the bottom comes from Chapter 3. It's the second one in Chapter 3 on medication administration equipment. The next slide shows you some examples of warnings that are threaded throughout the textbook. And multiple warnings are inserted in each chapter to caution students about common pitfalls and errors to avoid in nursing practice. The top warning on error-prone abbreviations comes from Chapter 2, which is Systems of Measurement. And the bottom warning regarding rapid administration of IV bolus meds appears in the Chapter 10, which is the chapter on infusion therapy and calculation. Here are a couple of examples of rounding rules. The top one comes from Chapter 9 on parenteral medication dosage calculations, and this teaches the student that rounding is based on syringe selection and then prompts the student to look at the rules that are summarized in the table in Chapter 9. The bottom rounding rule from Chapter 10, again, infusion therapy and calculations, teaches students that rounding electronically regulated IV rates depends on the calibration of the IV pump they're using. The next page shows some clinical clues. The next slide. So the top clinical clue comes from Chapter 8, which is enteral medication administration. It explains that some but not all solid enteral meds can be crushed and mixed with liquid for the purpose of administering it through an enteral tube. And there's a whole explanation in the chapter about how to deliver meds through an enteral feeding tube. The bottom clinical clue from the IV calculations chapters appears with the discussion of venous access devices, and it's adjacent to a graphic of a nurse flushing an access device. So you'll see that graphic later in this presentation. And so this clue actually explains why some nurses, old-time nurses like myself, refer to these access devices as quote-unquote heparin locks. The next slide shows you a chapter summary. This chapter summary is from Chapter 4. And there's a chapter summary at the end of each chapter. And the chapter summaries we've found out from students happen to be great starting points for students. So if you give them an assignment, to do a chapter or two, they'll usually start with the chapter summary because that will expose them to, it gives them a quick overview of all that's in the chapter. And then they can actually decide which areas they need to focus on more than others. The completion of this chapter summary is on the next slide. So you can see that the chapter summaries are organized by learning outcomes. This learning outcome is 4.1, and then you see learning outcome 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, and 4.5 on this slide. Here's an example of an NCLEX style question. So we've got at least 6 are included at the end of each chapter, and we try to include a couple of select all that apply, like the one that's shown here, with these 6 NCLEX style questions in each chapter. And so as is evident in this question, the NCLEX style questions are at an application level or higher. So to answer this question, the student not only has to do the math to determine that the answer is 5 milliliters, but then also has to figure out, well, which of those devices are calibrated. The answer is not 5 milliliters, the answer is 2.5 milliliters. They have to figure out which of those devices are calibrated at the 2.5 milliliter marking. The next slide shows us an example of how color coding is used throughout the text. This color coding example comes from Chapter 1, which is the one on basic math. And so you can see that step 1 in purple shows the corresponding math in purple below. Step 2 in red shows the corresponding math in red below, and so on. And we find that this is appealing to visual learners, some color coding. The next slide shows color coding examples that are included in all of the solve boxes throughout the text. So the unit of measurement that we are solving for is going to be in blue. And if there's more than one unit of measurement, the next one will be in red. So for example, if we're solving for milliliters per hour, then milliliters will be in blue and hours will be in red font. Again, reminding the students this is what we're solving for. It helps promote the labeling, the correct labeling of answers. And also if a student is a DA person, dimensional analysis person, they'll say, okay, what am I solving for? Because that's going to help them set up the DA equation. The next few slides show some graphics that appear throughout the text. So here, these graphics are from Chapter 3. And again, there's a lot of graphics throughout the text, and we feel that this really appeals to visual learners and helps students apply some of the written information. The next slide shows graphics from Chapter 6. The left image shows the nurse performing the first med label check as it's removed from the computerized dispensing machine. And the right image shows the nurse performing the third med label check as it is scanned at the bedside. And this obviously comes in the chapter where we're talking about safe medication administration. We're talking about identifying the right med and how we do 3 label checks in order to identify the right med. The next slide shows a couple of graphics, one from Chapter 10, the left one from Chapter 10, where the nurse is flushing the venous access device. And the right image is from Chapter 11, which is that's called Solution Calculations, that chapter. And this graphic appears within a discussion of solution calculations for enteral tube feedings. And so you can see this is showing the location of a G-tube. So those are some examples of some of the pedagogical features in the text. Now, what's new in addition to? Well, first of all, the visual theme of water on the cover was chosen very intentionally. Both Sandra and I are from the Ocean State, Rhode Island, and we love the water, but we also feel like the water induces kind of a feeling of relaxation. So we were hoping to promote, to allay some math anxiety with this visual theme, because the visual theme also appears not only on the cover but throughout the textbook. We've incorporated some memory aids in this edition, and we'll see some examples on the next couple of slides. To demystify administration of IV bolus medications, we wrote a step-by-step approach, and with the associated calculations. So we broke it down for the students. We've updated the insulin syringe graphics and added the U500 insulin syringe, which just came on the market in 2017. The weight-based heparin protocol in Chapter 14 is, you probably know this, is not only titrated by APTT, which is what is in the first edition, but we added another protocol because in some parts of the country, and here in Rhode Island, they titrate heparin, continuous infusions of heparin, according to the anti-factor XA assay levels. So we included that protocol in Appendix G, and we will include some problems, some homework problems associated with that protocol in the online materials. Again, to appeal to the visual learner, we also added graphics to illustrate implementation of the weight-based heparin protocol. And another new feature of the second edition will be mastery questions that are tagged by learning outcomes that will add to the online materials. We're working on those now. And mastery items, what I mean by that, those are questions that indicate that the student has mastered the material. Unlike homework questions that are sorted by learning outcome, mastery questions won't be sorted. So, and as you know, it's harder for the student to answer questions when the types of questions are all mixed up. That really tells us whether or not they understand the material and figure out what the question's asking. All right, so the next slide is showing you our visual theme. How awesome is this? We love our cover. The next slide shows you an example of a memory aid that we inserted. This is what we call the Factor 1000 scale. And so we feel that this helps students perform the metric-to-metric conversions, and it only shows the ones that are commonly used in healthcare. So for volume conversions, liter and milliliters are the only, liter to milliliter and vice versa are the only ones they need to know. For weight conversions, kilograms to grams to milligrams to micrograms, or in the reverse order, are the only units of measurement of weight they need to know. And we teach the student that the conversion factor between all of these conversions is 1,000 when they're converting to the unit of measurement next to them. Obviously, if they're converting from kilograms to milligrams, then the conversion factor is 1,000,000, not 1,000. So at any rate, when they want to convert liters to milliliters, they multiply by 1,000. Milliliters to liters, they divide by 1,000. Likewise, for the weight conversions, kilograms to grams, they multiply by 1,000. Grams to kilograms, they divide by 1,000. So they're moving the decimal point literally to the right 3 places or to the left 3 places when they're making these conversions. So we teach them how to use that. And the Factor 10 scale, which is on the next slide, contains the units of measurement for length that are commonly used in healthcare, which are centimeter and millimeter. And centi is to the left of milli on the metric number line, which shows the metric number line in the textbook. And so therefore, these conversions are a matter of moving the decimal point 1 place to the right or 1 place to the left. So we found a great success using this. We're currently using it with our students, and the students actually end up writing the little factor scales on their test before they take the test, and then it's a little memory aid for them. The steps, as I mentioned, we broke down the steps for administration of IV bolus medications, and that's the next slide, Jen. There we go. So step by step, and this slide just shows the steps. The next slide shows the math associated with step 1. So step 1 is calculate how much ketorolac to administer, and that is shown in the solve box on the right. The next slide shows the math associated with steps 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then it provides a summary statement at the bottom to pull all of the information together. The next slide shows you our updated insulin syringe graphics. If you are a user of the first edition, you know that we didn't have the odd calibrations on our insulin syringes. So now we do have them. And we also placed U100 at just below the flange so that students can clearly differentiate U100 and U500 insulin syringes. But we've also added a clinical clue in that chapter so that students know the orange caps are usually associated with U100 insulin syringes. The next graphic is showing you the U500 insulin syringe, which has been added to the text and used throughout. And as I mentioned before, it just came on the market in 2017. And we've obviously changed the text associated with students drawing up U500 insulin. As I mentioned before, we added another protocol for the weight-based heparin protocol, the protocol that's adjusted according to the anti-factor XA assay. This is in Appendix G. These are some of the steps in the protocol. If you look at the next slide, it shows you that there's actually 2 different protocols. There's one for DVT and there's one for acute coronary syndrome. And while they're pretty similar, you can see that the bolus dosing and the dosing in general is lower for acute coronary syndrome than it is for DVT. And we will add some homework questions addressing these protocols to the online material. The next slide shows you a graphic on implementation of the weight-based heparin protocol. So the steps in the protocol are on the left. The protocol itself is in the center on the right. And then the images that correspond to each of the steps are identified on the right. And we feel that this is showing initiation of the weight-based heparin protocol for a 73 kilogram patient. And there will be a figure 1453, which shows a titration, and figure 1454, which shows another titration of the protocol. So it really, again, appeals to visual learners. We've been very fortunate to receive some very nice feedback from our faculty reviewers. And this quote here captures some of the main text features. So this reviewer is stating, that we go beyond calculations to thoroughly include the concepts and principles of MedAdmin, and including warnings and common errors and case examples and clinical clues, and etc. We've been using the first edition of clinical nursing calculations at CCRI, where I teach, since it was released, and I am humbled to report that the student feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. This feedback comes from my student that I had in the summer. I wish Venera would be able to use Edition 2. I honestly can't wait to use it myself. I think this is where Jen comes in, right, Jen?
Thanks, Sue. That was fantastic. Before we get to the Q&A portion, I just want to review Navigate to Premier Access. So this is a product that is an online course. It is included free with each new print copy of the textbook. For those of you who might be familiar with it, it features an interactive ebook. Within the ebook, we have 10 animations, case studies, practice activities, assessments, instructor resources. It's also full of analytics and reporting tools from the LMS end of things. And as Sue mentioned, we're also adding NCLEX style questions to the online version as well. So that's pretty exciting. And if you're interested in trying it, we invite you to go to jblnavigate.com and you can try it today. And I am going to go through a few of the animations, so just give me 1 second. I'm just going to share out my screen in a bit of a different way. We have to go out to the browser.
To safely administer medications, pay close attention to essential information on the medication label. The generic name, also called the chemical name, is the single official name assigned to the drug in the United States. The generic name of this drug is renfenazine sulfate. If there is only one name on a drug label, it is the generic name. The trade name, also called the brand name or manufacturer name, varies from one company to another.
So that's just one example of one of the animations that you'll see within the text. I want to show you also another one. We'll do how to set up a primary IV. These are all accessed within the ebook that you see here. What I'm showing is the previous edition. We're still waiting on the upcoming edition, the second edition, to release. But we find these animations are a great way for students to learn.
Secondary tubing is shorter than primary tubing and has no injection ports. Using the extension hanger packaged with the secondary tubing, hang the primary IV lower than the secondary IV. Gravity causes the higher bag to infuse first. Spike the secondary bag with the short tubing and
We'll go through the entire animation, but just wanted to give you an idea of what these look like and how you find them within the ebook. And as we had mentioned at the start, we are open to taking questions. And just to get back to the animations for a minute here, here's the full list of all of the animations as well as the chapter where you will be able to find them in the ebook. So that really makes a nice addition in terms of content. So at this time, if you do have any questions, anything about the upcoming edition, any questions specifically that you'd like to ask Sue about teaching clinical nursing calculations, she's happy to answer questions. I know we might have a few that have come in here. And we do have a question, Sue. One instructor is asking, what is your mode of delivery for the course with this text? Has it been delivered on ground only, hybrid, online? Do you feel that the text is suited for one delivery method over the other?
No, it actually can be used in any way. We have a separate course called Dosage Calculations, but it is an elective. It is a popular elective. Some students take it before they get in the program while they're waiting to get in. Some students take it during the program. But what we've done is also thread the material throughout. We have 3 1-credit farm courses. So the material, the content in the book is threaded throughout our 3 farm courses. And so obviously the most basic information is in Farm 1. And we give it to the students as self-study modules. And I'd be happy to share the modules, how we break it down for the student. And they have to study the material, do the calculations, and then be prepared to take a dosage calculation quiz in their farm course. So it's part of their farm grade, and they have to pass it with an 85 in semester 1 and 2 and a 90 in semesters 3 and 4 before they can pass meds. And if they don't pass it on the second attempt, they actually can't pass the course. So then they have to repeat the course. So that is we use it both ways, and we have an fully online course, and we have a face-to-face course as well.
Thanks, Sue. We have another question. I'm not sure if you just answered that in your previous answer, but someone's asking, can this textbook be used as an adjunct to an existing farm course?
Yes, that's how we use it. Exactly.
Okay. Great. if you're interested in requesting a review copy, you will receive this email post webinar, but if you wanted to visit go.jblearning.com/nursingcalc, that will bring you out to the product page. If you would like to learn a little bit more about Navigate, which is the online course that accompanies this product, you can visit jblnavigate.com/2. And we did record this session, so if you'd like to watch it again, if you want to share it with your colleagues, it will be posted to our YouTube channel within about 1 day, and I'll follow up with that link once it's been posted so that you'll have it to share or just to bookmark. And the presentation slides also will be available in the product page as well. We have a few more questions. Actually, I think that wraps it up. It was just someone saying thank you. Well,
I do want to say one other thing. If anybody has any questions that they think of later or are interested in looking at my syllabus for the standalone course and our modules, feel free to email me. It's my first initial, last name at ccri.edu. And that CCRI is where I teach Community College of Rhode Island. So I'm happy to share any of my materials. Absolutely.
Thank you, Sue, and want to, really thank you for all of your time and effort today, putting together a fantastic presentation and all of those examples. And this textbook is really going to be a great resource for those students taking clinical nursing calculations. And we want to thank everyone for joining us today. We don't have any more questions at this time, but you will receive follow-up on how you can request a textbook, how you can download the presentation slides, and then also how you can access the recording today. So thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. And thanks again, Sue. We really appreciate your being here today.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.